Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come to order, and without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Today, the committee will examine 34 federal programs the Government Accountability Office has identified as high risk. Programs are selected, among other factors, for risks posed to public safety, public health or safety, national security, economic growth, and privacy or citizens' rights. With this hearing, we have an opportunity to better understand how to help agencies fully resolve the issues identified. Regrettably, many of the areas identified in this year's high-risk list are of no surprise. It's been 2 years since the GAO last issued its high-risk report. They do it for each Congress. And since then, only one program was removed. 3 programs have been added. More concerning, 6 areas have been listed by GAO as, quote, high risk, end quote, since the report's inception 27 years ago. 27 years ago. Members on this panel, we need to pay attention to this. These are good people doing a lot of good work. They're telling us, they're screaming at us to actually get something done and address these issues. The 6 areas listed since 1990 are significant programs too, such as Medicare, the DoD weapons system acquisition. These are big, weighty issues that need to be addressed. The agencies in these programs they administer must be doing better. And at a time when the national debt nears $20 trillion, addressing high risk can also have a meaningful impact on the fiscal health of the nation. The GAO estimates the progress in high-risk areas during the past decade resulted in financial benefits totaling approximately $240 billion. That's an average of roughly $24 billion a year, but there's much, much more to be done. And thankfully, progress is possible, and this year's report demonstrates that as well. GAO is removing one key area from the high-risk list. First added in 2003, GAO is removing, quote, interagency efforts to establish effective mechanisms for sharing and managing terrorism-related information, end quote. A very important topic that's important to all of our future. Notable progress also occurred in the Department of Defense's supply chain management, and with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration closing data gaps in weather satellite data. This progress is welcome news, but I want all the items on the high-risk list to be resolved, fully resolved, as soon as possible. It'd be nothing better than to have Mr. Dodaro come here and say, well, there's nothing on the high-risk list, but I think you got some job security and the people behind you have some job security because we aren't anywhere close to that. So there are literally billions of dollars that are wasted through poor management, slow response to emerging risks, and failure to prioritize. I look forward to discussing with the Comptroller General how to make significant and sustained progress towards resolving these most critical issues. And Mr. Dodaro, we appreciate you in particular. You've made yourself available at every turn, a great resource and understanding of how the government works and where it's not working. And I also want to thank all the men and women who serve in this effort to make our country and make the government as efficient and as effective as possible. We really do rely upon you and your staff to take the time and effort that, and when you issue these reports and have that perspective, it's my goal, my intention, my commitment that we need to pay attention to that to help fix these problems. You're identifying them, and you're pushing these departments and agencies, but we also play a role in Congress to actually put in place the legislation that's needed in order to solve many of these issues. So we really do appreciate you in particular, and again, the men and women who serve in the GAO. Very, very helpful. I'd now like to recognize the Ranking Member, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you for having this hearing today. Mr. Dodaro, I thank you for this in-depth work that you and all the dedicated professionals to GAO put into updating this high-risk report every Congress. And I join the chairman in thanking everybody, because I know that you don't do this by yourself. Federal employees are very dedicated, giving blood, sweat, and tears to make sure that government functions properly and that we maintain this democracy. GAO reports, and I quote, solutions to high-risk problems potentially save billions of dollars, improve service to the public and strengthen government performance and accountability, end of quote. The work at GAO complements this committee's mission, and we are indeed grateful for it. I was particularly pleased to see this year's report highlight that progress over the past decade has resulted in financial benefits totaling approximately $240 billion. That's a lot of money. Real progress has been made, and indeed it must continue. We can always do better. We cannot afford to go backwards. Unfortunately, I fear that we may be on the brink of doing just that. Less than a month into office, the President's actions threaten to undermine many government-wide recommendations the nonpartisan experts at GAO have issued. Progress of 3 high-risk areas in particular are in jeopardy under President Trump's administration: managing strategic human capital, modernizing the financial regulatory system, and managing fiscal exposure to the risk of climate change. First, on January 23, 2017, President Trump issued an executive order freezing employee hiring. GAO has stated in the past that hiring freezes, quote, disrupt agency operations and in some cases increase the cost to government, end of quote. In fact, this year's GAO report states, and I quote, of the 34 high-risk areas listed, 15 areas had skill gaps playing a contributory role, unquote. A hearing freeze could hamstring the ability of agencies to address the needs of the American citizens, businesses, and consumers. As one who represents a lot of employees at Social Security, Mr. Dodaro, I hear over and over again where the lack of employees has made it so much more difficult for people to do their jobs. There's people who, at one time, there were 4 people doing the job, then they've got 1. And at the same time, we in Capitol Hill, these folks on this panel, we expect them to still be able to produce. And what's happening in those instances is that some people are leaving because they just cannot take it. It could exacerbate skill gaps at the federal agencies, making them less productive and less effective. Second, we owe it to the American public to continue implementing GAO's recommendations to modernize our financial regulatory system. That begins by protecting provisions of Dodd-Frank and shield American consumers, not by rolling back those provisions. That makes no sense. GAO recommends implementing the remaining Dodd-Frank regulatory rules to ensure the effective functioning of reforms to the United States financial regulatory system, and I wholeheartedly agree. We must continue to support this vital work, not undermine it. Finally, in order to protect the America from fiscal exposure to the risk of climate change, we must address this issue head on. How can we work together to solve a problem if President Trump and some congressional Republicans do not even acknowledge its existence? Generations yet unborn deserve better than to be burdened by the potentially catastrophic cost of climate change risks my colleagues across the aisle seem to ignore. I implore my colleagues to fully consider the progress we have made on all of these issues and the harm that may be done if we go down the path of the current administration. I look forward to GAO illuminating all that is at stake today. And again, I want to thank all the employees of GAO for doing what you do every single day. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. We'll hold the record open for 5 legislative days for members who'd like to submit a written statement. Now I'd like to recognize and welcome our witness for today, the hearing, the Honorable Gene Dodaro, Comptroller General of the United States Government Accountability Office. There are a number of people that we're also going to swear in, as we found in past experiences As we had very specific questions, there are subject matter experts, but in order to testify, they too need to be sworn in. These include Chris Mim, Managing Director for Strategic Issues at GAO, Mark Gaffigan, not to be confused with Jim, the Managing Director for Natural Resources. I'm sure I'm the first one to ever use that line. He's the Managing Director for Natural Resources and Environment at the GAO. Barbara Bovberg, Managing Director for Education, Workforce, and Income Security at GAO. George Scott, Managing Director of Homeland Security and Justice. All of these are at the GAO. Dave Pauner, Director of Information Technology. Greg Bulshushin, I hope I pronounced that right, Director of Information and Technology. Oris Williams-Brown, Managing Director for Financial Markets and Community Investment. Nikki Clowers, Managing Director for Health Care. And Kathleen Barrick, Managing Director for Defense Capabilities and Management. Paul Francis, Managing Director for Acquisitions and Sourcing. And Kate Sigerud, who's the Managing Director for Congressional Relations. Their expertise is needed in this hearing. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses are to be sworn before they testify. So we need to do this in mass. If you can please all rise and raise your right hands. Thank you. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record reflect that all the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Mr. Dodaro, you're a veteran in doing this. We'll give you as much time or latitude as you'd like. We do appreciate you being here, and we'll now turn the time to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss our latest edition of the high-risk list. As been pointing out in both of your opening statements, there have been areas, many areas, where solid progress has been made. In fact, 23 of the 32 areas we had on the high-risk list in 2015 have either met or fully met the 5 criteria for coming off the list. Those criteria are leadership, the capacity, planning, monitoring, and actually demonstrating some progress, which is the most difficult criteria to meet. That progress was achieved through a lot of hard work by the agency leaders and the staff in those agencies and by the Congress. I really want to compliment the Congress over this last 2-year period. Over a dozen pieces of legislation were passed to address individual high-risk areas and some government-wide issues as well. And Congress held over 250 hearings on subjects covered by the high-risk hearings. And this committee in particular is to be commended, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cummings, for the bipartisan approach that has been taken to address many of these issues, which is really needed. And so I look forward to working with you to help resolve all these areas. I share your interest in getting as many areas off this list as possible. I made that a goal during my confirmation hearing, and we'll maintain our independence. We're not going to take anything off the list till it's ready, but we're trying to do what we can to be specific and get them off the list. The one area you mentioned, managing information sharing of terrorism-related information, has really shown steady progress over the years, met all criteria, so it's coming off the list. But I want to assure this committee, when something goes off the list, it's not out of sight. So we're still monitoring, and we'll keep an eye on it to make sure we don't have any regression in that area. On the other side, there's a number of areas that really need some substantial attention. Veterans health care, which we put on the last update in 2015. DOD financial management, which we've talked about in the past, still needs substantial attention. Protecting our information systems from cyber attacks and our critical infrastructure throughout the United States is important. We first put cybersecurity across the federal government on the high-risk list in 1997. So that's the 20th anniversary of us warning about this issue, and there's still a lot that needs to be done. Information technology acquisitions and operations, which this committee has shown a lot of good oversight in a number of hearings. 2 of the subcommittees in particular have been working together on that area. So I commend the committee in that regard. And reforming housing finance in the federal government. Fannie and Freddie are still in conservatorship. They've been there since 2008. The federal government's assuming too much risk in the housing market, in my opinion, and things need to be done in that area as well. We are, as you mentioned, we're adding 3 new areas this year. I'll quickly cover them in closing. Number one is federal activities to work with tribes and their members. Wherever we look, if it's helping them with education, ensuring safety of schools, ensuring adequate health care for Indian tribes and their members, or allowing them to take energy resources off their land and put them into production so it can generate revenues. There is inadequate federal oversight and support. We've made a number of recommendations, 41, 39 are still outstanding. This needs attention. Secondly is the growth in environmental liabilities. This is to clean up nuclear weapons complex waste, as well as disposing of civilian waste generated through nuclear power plants. This liability has grown. It's approaching $1.5 trillion, and we don't believe that's even a total estimate yet that's accurate. The government's been spending tens of billions of dollars to try to clean up this activity over the past several years, but the liability keeps growing. We made a number of recommendations. They need a more risk-based approach in this area. And then lastly, the decennial census, the 2020 census. If you look back on the high-risk list, the census is one we put on a 2010 census in 2008, and it needs attention. The cost exceeded $12 billion for the 2020 census. This one's on track, if you use the old methods, to be close to $18 billion. I'm sorry, I think I said trillion. It's 12.3 billion, and on track to be close to that. But they're trying some innovative measures, which I can talk about in the Q&A, but those measures such as using the internet for response and developing innovative ways not to do physical canvassing on street walking in all the communities introduces a lot of risk. And we think there's much more needs to be done to manage that risk so we have a cost-effective and an effective census, which is very important. So, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cummings, I appreciate your comments about the GAO workforce. We have a very talented, dedicated group of people. We look forward to working with you to resolve all the areas on the high-risk list. So thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. We'll now start by recognizing the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Dodaro, thank you for your work. I do appreciate the work that you do and your agency. It's very helpful to this committee. There are several areas I'd like to get into very quickly, but the ranking member mentioned Dodd-Frank, and we had a hearing in here 2 or 3 months ago with the head of the FDIC, and it's been brought out that something like 1 in 5 banks and credit unions have gone under since Dodd-Frank or have disappeared. And you mentioned in your report, quote, mounting regulations stemming from Dodd-Frank. Do you and your experts, we had one witness who said you have to have probably at least $1 billion in assets to survive in the banking business today. Do you and your experts foresee a continuation of this, of so many banks going under or being forced to merge or at high risk?
There have been a number of areas we've looked at, particularly as small community banks and what the burden would be for them. The number of banks, you know, we do the audit of the Federal Deposit Insurance Fund. The number of banks that have failed have been going down over this past several years, and the number on the trouble list or the watch list that they have has been going down as well. So it may be in some other sectors of the economy. I have Oris Williams Brown here, but there are definitely some things that need streamlined, and we've made recommendations. The stress tests that the banks are put under, I think we have to look for ways, and the way we've advised the Congress is looking for ways to make refinements that reduce the regulatory burden, but still do not undermine the need for banks to have adequate capital reserves to withstand downturns in the economy. We're looking very carefully now at the bank examination process because of concentrations in commercial real estate lending and auto lending as well. Ms. Brown is with me today. She's our expert in this area. I'll just ask her to address this issue.
We currently have work underway looking at the effect of various pieces of legislation on small banks, community banks. So we're looking at the issue of regulatory burden. We are trying to identify if there are certain characteristics of legislation or laws that particularly impact small banks. We're also looking at exemptions and a variety of issues. So that work will be coming out later this year that specifically addresses this issue.
Well, you do agree, I think everyone agrees, that this regulatory burden is much more difficult for the small banks to work with than these large giant banks, and the total deposits of the 5 largest banks have gone up from 22% of total deposits to 44% since the passing of Dodd-Frank. Let me ask you, Mr. Dodaro, about another area. Several years ago, I received a letter from the BLM and a recommendation from OMB. BLM identified over 3 million acres of land that they would like to sell or dispose of, and we did pass a bill last year, the Federal Asset Sale and Transfer Act. The GAO has identified 273,000 buildings that the federal government either leases or owns. Are we making any progress toward raising some money from some of the sale of some of these lands? We seem to continue taking over more land instead of getting rid of some of this land that even the government, even the different agencies don't want.
There's some progress being made. There's a national strategy that was issued. You mentioned the legislation. Congress passed 2 pieces of legislation late last year that will help in that area. One property we reported in our testimony is Cotton Annex. They've been trying to sell. We understand they just got a bid on that. I think this board that the Congress has set up to independently identify some high-value properties is an important area as well. And the agencies need to make sure that the property, some of the properties are properly maintained and upgraded so that they're actually able to be sold or they're disposed of in adequate means. So we're making some progress in that area, but there's a lot more that still needs to be done.
I think it's pretty clear that the federal government owns or leases far too many buildings. Let me quickly get into one other area. The President has advocated a $1 trillion increase in spending on transportation, yet you say in your report that spending has not improved system performance in the transportation area. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's because the programs that were set up by Department of Treasury, or excuse me, Transportation, really did not adequately measure the results of the investment that the federal government had made. We knew a lot of money was being spent, but was it actually improving the safety of the system, the condition of the roads, the condition of the bridges? So Congress mandated a more performance-based system, which the Transportation's in the process of issuing regulations, and it'll soon be implemented. So by the next update, we'll know whether that's working well or not. But our putting this on the high-risk list emanated from the financing issue, that there's really, the Highway Trust Fund has not been adequate enough for a number of years now. Congress has been supplementing that with general appropriation funds. They really need to find a permanent financing vehicle. Congress did find a temporary one that'll get us through 2020, but between 2021 and 2026, CBO is estimating there'll be over $1 billion shortfall in what's needed to maintain the roads. So there are 2 issues, finding the money and then making sure the money's producing the right results. And that's what we've been focused on.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, General Dodaro and your team. I don't know if anyone's left at GAO today, but we're glad you're all here. And Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for this hearing. I think this is one of the most important hearings we have every year, and I think this is one of the most signal pieces of work done by the federal government about the federal government. And I thank GAO for the contribution, because it could virtually be the work plan of this committee. And it brings us together. It's not partisan, and there's a lot of good work we can do in collaboration with our colleagues at GAO, so thank you. I was listening to Mr. Duncan, who got in a little dig at Dodd-Frank. So since we passed Dodd-Frank, did I understand you, Mr. Dodaro, to say the fact of the matter is bank failures have gone down, not up? Is that correct?
That's correct.
And is it also true that there have been no bailouts since that legislation was passed? Any additional bailouts?
I can't think of any. I don't
Not
think
any,
so.
yeah.
Right.
And in '08 and '09, what was the total amount of banking bailouts to the taxpayer in this country?
Well, it was a lot.
In
It
the
was,
hundreds-
it was the hundreds of billions.
Hundreds of
dollars.
billions of dollars, right? That's a
Right.
lot. I
Yeah,
agree.
right.
It's a technical term, a lot.
That's right.
I want to talk about the census, if I can, because to me, that's the intersection of IT and the function of government. The census is a critical piece of work that must be done. Lots flows from it, including representation in this body. The people, have their representation allocated based on the findings of that census. Allocation of resources from the federal government to the states flows from data from the census. And in looking at your report, I want to make sure I understand this. You state that with the technology they're using in field tests, 25% of households could not be contacted by Bureau enumerators even after 6 attempts.
Chris?
Is that correct?
Yeah, let me call up our expert in that area, Mr. Mim.
Mr. Mim, welcome.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir, that is correct.
That's astounding. 25%. That calls into question the accuracy of the census itself. What's the nature of the problem?
Well, it's a number of things, and a lot of it is just the changing nature of American society. We have increasing gated communities, and so it can be very difficult to work with property managers and others to get access then to the individual housing units. We have increased, obviously, diversity in languages. We have to make sure that we send enumerators that can speak the language in the community in which they're enumerating. A lot of it's a lot of the complexity there. There were also some changes that we were urging in census rules on how they do that follow-up to make sure that they're not just following up at the same time on repetitive days, that they're actually going at different times. They need to adjust the rules to allow them to do that.
One of the problems, though, I think you highlighted was, I get that, and obviously that's not a technology problem, but the technology piece there is the software makes it hard to leave notes when an enumerator, in fact, knocks on your door and you're not home. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, and that's also part of what I was mentioning. It's the third element there is in allowing then subsequent or enumerators to know not to go back at, if they go at noon for 3 straight days in a row and there hasn't been someone there at noon, if people are all working, they need to be able to say, okay, we'll come back at 5 o'clock or we'll come back before, people leave for work.
This committee had hearings with the census officials on the technology piece, and what happened in 2010 was kind of a disaster in terms of technology, custom-made, handheld devices and so forth. And so this time, they were going to use off-the-shelf and with modifications. And it was hopefully going to lower costs. The 2010 census was the most expensive in history, $12.3 billion.
Yes, sir.
So how's that working out for us in terms of these modified off-the-shelf devices and the hopeful goal of lowering the cost?
It's still an open issue, sir. I mean, there are 3 big technology issues that they're confronting. Is one, to make sure that we can have the internet response option. Second is that they have a major processing technology.
Let me interrupt you when you say that, just so we all understand what that means. In other words, a subject, a citizen, can go on the internet and respond if an enumerator hasn't reached me.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And the second is a major processing effort, which is called CEDCAP. And then the third then is the mobile devices, and which you alluded to was a big problem last time. There are unresolved issues with all 3 of these major technology issues. It was a major driver as to why we put the 2020 census on the high-risk list.
My time has run out, but just bottom line, how worried should we be that here we go again, the Census Bureau, with best intentions, is facing 3 years out a serious problem both with the technology and with the budget, the cost of this enterprise? Or are these just glitches that we're confident can be worked out?
If we weren't worried, we wouldn't put it on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Dodaro. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I agree.
Mr. Mim, if you can just stay right there, I'm going to go ahead and recognize myself, and I want to follow up on what Mr. Conley was saying at the census. What's your biggest worry right now?
The biggest worry right now, I think, is that they have a series of innovations that are very important potential innovations that can have huge cost savings implications if they work out. They have a series of these innovations at the same time that they are canceling tests in the field for later this year and into 2018. They need to make sure that that they're able to have these innovations, the internet response, increasing use of administrative records, and others, be able to work together in concert in census-taking operations. That's a
How far behind schedule are they?
It's not so much that they're behind schedule. It's that they're in a sense racing to catch. They need to make sure that they maintain the schedule that they're on. They've canceled a test that's coming up, for a variety of regions, which they say is primarily driven by budget concerns. Budget concerns related to the continuing CR and other issues. We're quite concerned that they need to make sure that all these innovations are tested in census-like operations. That's key to making sure that they maintain the quality of the census, but then also delivering on a more efficient census as well.
Now, one of the things that is important to executing on a census, or going out and finding what ends up being a couple 100,000 people to go out and do the enumeration, I've been an advocate since I've been here to tap into the Postal Service. We actually have a workforce of people that have uniforms, they have clearances, we trust them, we've identified them, and they're familiar with the neighborhoods. They don't need to go remap the world. Have you done anything or looked at anything? We're working towards introducing a piece of legislation that would allow postal workers to do this. They may need to make more money to do it. It's going to take money to still train them, but they're already walking the routes. They already know the neighborhoods. Have you looked at that at all?
We've looked at it indirectly. I mean, I know as you've mentioned, Mr. Chairman, this is an issue that has been, or a question that's been asked of the Census Bureau for at least the last 2 or 3 census about the increasing use of the Postal Service in taking the census. There are cost implications. Typically, a letter carrier will make more than a census enumerator that would take place. It is, a pretty labor intensive, and so we'd have to figure out where they could find the time within their schedule. On the other hand, as you point out, they do know the neighborhoods, and in fact, in many cases, would know where the hidden households are, which is a major challenge that the Bureau faces. It's not just a postal address, but are there, basement units or something like that. That's the trade-off that would have to be.
And we also trust them, I think, is a big part of that issue. Mr. Dodaro, I want to go back to the post office. This committee is looking at legislation dealing with the post office. What happens if we do nothing? The current financial trajectory of the post office, what's your view of that?
Well, right now, they're not making the prepayments for the retirement benefits area, and that's a big problem. That's a growing issue. That means at some point, those benefits are going to have to be paid. And if the Postal Service hasn't pre-funded it over the period of time, that's going to be a problem. They're already maxed out and they're borrowing from the Treasury Department at $15 billion. They can't borrow any more money from the Treasury at this time. Their other liabilities for workmen's compensation are going up. Their total liabilities, I think it's about 130% of their revenues at this point. So, but the underlying problem is the business model's really broken. First-class mail has been going down. It's likely to go down for the foreseeable future. It's the most profitable margin that they have. And they've taken major cost-cutting moves, but they don't have any major other cost-cutting activities planned. So they really need help. So we've put on the list, Congress has to act. There needs to be a reform in this area.
And we're looking at a bailout if we don't fix it, correct?
Yes.
This is something that I think is of urgent need for this committee, and I'm glad that we're on top of it, but we do need to pass a piece of legislation to fix the systemic problems. Fannie and Freddie, They, as a quasi-government agency, there isn't much exposure that the public gets to see or look under the hood. I've been working on a piece of legislation to give Freedom of Information Act requests that the public could actually issue a FOIA request to Fannie and Freddie. Do you have any opinion or thoughts on that?
I could give that some thought. I mean, generally, I'm a supporter of the Freedom of Information Act.
Is there any reason you can think of off the top of your head that why they shouldn't be subject to FOIA requests?
None off the top of my head, unless there's a lot of litigation right now, and I think that may be a complicating factor, but that's true for every federal agency.
That is, it's true for every agency. It
Yeah.
just seems that the American public, we have all the liability for Fannie and Freddie, correct?
That's correct.
Do you have any, again, you're amazing with numbers off the top of your head, but what is the ongoing liability at Fannie and Freddie?
Well, there's, in law, I think it's over $200 billion that potentially, Oris has the specific numbers, but it's over $200 billion that they could still potentially draw from the Treasury Department. They've paid more back than what the government lent them during the crisis, but if there's another downturn in the housing economy, their capital reserves going towards zero by 2018. At least at this time, we have a regulatory entity. For years we warned that they weren't regulated enough, but it came too late.
Right. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Just the specific.
Sorry, your microphone.
So Freddie and Fannie received $187.5 billion from the Treasury. They have $258.1 billion available that they can receive in additional assistance, and they have repaid more than $250 billion in dividends to the Treasury. So right now, they paid more to Treasury than they received initially in assistance.
It just seems to me with so much exposure to the federal taxpayers, the taxpayers should be able to issue a Freedom of Information Act request.
Yeah, I might say also, Mr. Chairman, on this, we've issued a number of reports about a framework that could be used to make decisions on Fannie and Freddie and some of the options available. So we'd be happy to share that information for the record.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings.
Mr. Darrow, the high-risk report states that the Office of Personnel Management and the Chief Human Capital Officers Council, along with agencies, identified 6 government-wide occupations with mission-critical skill gaps. One of these occupations is auditor. As you know, agencies across the government have auditors within their offices of Inspector General, who are tasked with helping detect and prevent fraud, waste, and abuse, a mission that helps our committee in oversight. Do the auditor positions described in the report include those within the Inspector General's office?
Yes.
And so is it correct to say that the IG offices do not have enough highly skilled and qualified auditors?
Well, I think that's always a concern for that community. I know, we have issues we're focused on as well. So let me ask Mr. Mim if he has any more insight.
Yes, sir, it's 2 things. It's in one case, or in some cases, it's obviously just a number of people. It's also a skill set that's an issue. This committee and others was instrumental in passing the Data Act, which will provide just a wealth of additional information. And so data analytics is a skill set that both agencies need, but also auditors need to better target their audits. And so it's both skills in terms of competencies as well as numbers of people.
Well, President Trump ordered a hiring freeze during his first week in office. What will be the likely impact of a hiring freeze on the government's ability to address the mission-critical skills gaps of auditors?
It will make it more difficult. We've looked at hiring freezes in the past by prior administrations, and they haven't proven to be effective in either reducing costs, and they cause some problems if they're in effect for a long period of time. Now, in this case, they've made a number of exceptions to that area.
Is this one of them? Is this one of them?
I don't believe so. And they're supposed to come up with a plan. I think a lot of it will depend on what kind of plan they come up with at the end of this temporary hiring freeze. But a sustained hiring freeze is not the best way. It's better to do it through a budget or workforce plan.
And what kind of problems does it cause?
Well, it causes, we know there are already skill gaps. You mentioned in your opening statement that
Social Security.
Well, Social Security, I mean, cybersecurity, acquisition workforce, oil and gas management, petroleum engineers, a number of areas on our high-risk list have human capital, nurses at the VA. You know, there's a lot of areas, and there will be likely emerging skill gaps, and you're going to have a lot of people retiring. There's a lot of people retiring in the federal government. So you have to be able to realign the workforce. The retirements give you an opportunity to realign your workforce, but you have to have that committed. I mean, if you want to reduce the number of federal employees, in my opinion, you have to reduce the functions that those employees are doing. If you don't reduce federal programs or eliminate programs or reduce things or find some other way to do it, if you just eliminate the people but keep all the functions there, you're going to have a problem.
Yeah. If the ability to hire skilled personnel to address the skills gap is taken off the table, you know, one of my fears is that IGs will be hampered in their capacity to detect and prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. So you, I take it, based upon what you just said, would agree with that?
Well, we're going to monitor that issue. If it stays in effect for a long period of time, it's going to have effects. What we found before, it was that it reduced the revenue coming to the government because IRS wasn't able to hire revenue agents. It caused agencies to hire contractors or temporary employees. It really didn't end up saving much, reducing the size of the workforce as much as anticipated, and it caused agencies problems in implementing their missions.
So when we go out and we hire these contractors, what kind of problems does that, I mean, have you looked at that overall?
Yeah, well,
I mean, generally.
Yeah. I mean, there are a number of contract management issues already on the high-risk list. We've got DOD contract management, we've got DOE, Energy Department contract management, NASA acquisitions, so having the right people to oversee the contractors is very, very important. And if you don't have that in place, then you don't have necessarily a good prospect of getting the requirements right in the first place and proper direction oversight over the contractors.
Now, your report also states, and I quote, according to OPM data government-wide, over 34% of federal employees on board by the end fiscal year 2015 will be eligible to retire. It also says, and I quote, a potential wave of employee retirements could produce gaps in leadership and institutional knowledge that threaten to aggravate the problems created by existing skill gaps. Can you explain how a retirement wave exacerbates the skill gaps? And then I'm finished.
Yeah. Chris?
Well, it's in two senses, sir, or at least in two senses. One is that if you have staff with critical skills that are retirement eligible and they leave without an effective succession planning programs within agencies and the knowledge transfer programs, you can have basically some of your very most skilled people walking out the door. Likewise, at a leadership level, that you can lose a core of your senior executive and other leadership can go out if you don't have a good succession planning program. As the Comptroller General was mentioning, is that it provides an opportunity for agencies to rethink what their skills gaps or what their competencies are that they need. So retirements are not necessarily a bad thing. It's just retirements that aren't factored in as part of a succession planning program are a bad thing.
All right, thank you very much.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Walker, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dodaro, would you take a few minutes and as we discuss the Medicaid program, I have a couple questions there, and I don't know how you are able to do this so much from memory, but we'll give it a shot here as we move forward. Can you tell me what the improper payment rate of the Medicare program is right now?
I think it's over 10%, and it's gone up recently. Is that correct, Nikki? Yeah, that's correct. It's over 10%. So it was about $36 billion last year in improper payments in Medicaid. And I don't believe, Mr. Walker, Congressman Moore, that that's even the true magnitude of the problem, because the managed care portion of Medicaid shows very small improper payment rates because they're only measuring what they pay the contractor, not what the contractor pays the beneficiaries.
Okay.
So we got them to put a new rule in place that I think will shed more light on this. So they're going to audit the Medicare contractors.
Is that 10%?
Medicaid, excuse me.
Thank you. Is that 10% higher or lower than last year?
It's higher.
So we're trending, obviously, the wrong direction.
Well, I'm very concerned about both Medicaid and Medicare. They're the fastest growing programs in the federal government's portfolio. They're estimated to continue to grow at, over 6% for the foreseeable future. And the most of the improper payments, government-wide, was $144 billion. $60 billion in that was Medicare, $36 billion was Medicaid.
Okay. Let's drill down a little bit further if we can then. How did the improper payment rate change from before the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act was enacted to after states began to expand Medicaid?
Nikki,
The rate has continued to go up over the past few years.
Yeah, one of the reasons that they cite, Congressman, for the rate going up is that states didn't have the proper systems in to determine eligibility under the new Affordable Care Act regulation. So it's had some effect on that. Not to say that some people may not be. They've been just able to demonstrate that they're eligible.
Okay. Are there anything that you guys are doing or have done or could do, past, present, or future, in examining the reasons why these rates continue to change?
Yeah, we've had a lot of recommendations in those areas. First is to get better data. The Medicaid data is really not good at all that the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Studies has. It's old data. It's a year or two out of date. It's very inaccurate, very unreliable. We've recommended that they audit these managed care providers. I've worked with state auditors. In fact, state auditor from North Carolina was involved in our discussions to try to get the state auditors to do more oversight and continuous auditing of the Medicaid program, since it's such a large percent of the state budget activities. We've suggested, and Congress has given the go-ahead to take the Social Security numbers off Medicare cards. We thought that that was leading to a problem. We tried for about almost a decade to do that. So we've got a number of other recommendations, but they need to, we're working on it. I've given this a high priority. Since Congress has required improper payments to be reported, measured and reported, since 2003, it's over $1.2 trillion that have been reported. And last year was 112 programs at 22 different agencies. So it's not just confined. Medicare and Medicaid are the largest, but it's more of a pervasive problem than I would like to see.
Speaking of the different states, I'm going to pick one. I'm going to pick Arkansas. A recent review of the Medicaid enrollee in Arkansas found 43,000 people who had moved out of the state yet remained on Medicaid. 7,000 of these that had appeared to have never lived in the state. So it is very likely that two states may be paying two different insurance companies for that same individual. Any proposal on what we can do with such a problem?
Yeah. Well, we've recommended that they make sure that they have adequate eligibility determination. There are two issues. One is providers, to make sure that the only proper providers are in the programs, and second is eligibility determination. Let me ask Nikki if there's anything else she wants to add.
I was going to mention the eligibility determinations as well as checks for duplicate coverage, that they need to do that on a regular basis.
Thank you, Mr. Dodaro. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman from North Carolina. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Kelly, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to the witnesses. Mr. Dodaro, your report states, and I quote, over the past several years, GAO has made about 2,500 recommendations to agencies aimed at improving the security of federal systems and information. These recommendations would help agencies strengthen technical security controls over their computer networks and systems, fully implement aspects of their information security programs, and protect the privacy of personally identifiable information held on their systems. The implementation of these systems are critical to addressing the privacy concerns of citizens in an age where hacking seems rampant. Can you explain why, as of October 2016, close to half of those information security-related recommendations have not been implemented?
I've been very concerned about the pace of agencies implementing our recommendations in this area. As I mentioned in my opening statement, We at first identified this as a government-wide problem. It's the first time we ever designated anything across the entire federal government high risk in 1997. It was hard to get agencies' attention to put in place comprehensive systems. Secondly, there's a lot of legacy systems, old systems where they just can't keep up with patching things appropriately, and they need to replace the legacy systems, as I know you're aware of that as well. They don't have comprehensive systems in place, and despite the breaches that have occurred, most recently, there's more attention being given to this area, but not enough, from my opinion, sense of urgency in actually fixing these problems. So I'm hoping as I meet with the new officials for the new administration, the cabinet officials, I put this on their radar screen for prompt attention.
Thank you. In your report, you also discussed the need for the federal government to improve its abilities to detect, respond, and to mitigate cyber incidents. To that end, we've heard encouraging news about the implementation of continuous diagnostics and monitoring, or CDM. In your opinion, how are DHS, GSA, and other agencies doing in its implementation, and what challenges are they facing?
Greg Wilshusen's our expert in this area. He has good insights in that. Greg, hit the mic.
Yes, certainly we believe that CDM is a tool that can help agencies better secure their systems by looking at the configurations of those systems, making sure that they're in compliance with agency standards, identify vulnerabilities, and even just to identify the devices on the networks. What we have found and what we will be looking at, because we are going to be starting an engagement to look at the CDM program specifically, is that agencies generally do not do a very good job of configuring their systems in accordance with sound security principles. It's something we identify at just about every agency we go to, including just the installation of patches, for example, in a timely manner and using software that's no longer supported by the vendors. CDM and having a continuous monitoring program in place that's effectively in place across the entire enterprise will help to identify those instances, and hopefully agencies will act on that information.
Okay. Now, CDM is just one of the many steps that we need to take. The federal government is to be a leader in cybersecurity, and we also passed a bipartisan Modernizing Government Technology Act, or MGT, but we also need to improve cybersecurity in the procurement process. In 2013, GSA and DOD published a report recommending the incorporation of cybersecurity standards into the federal IT acquisition process. How helpful would these standards be in improving the federal government's overall cybersecurity?
Well, I would just like to say that it's critical for information security controls to be designed into systems at the very beginning. Trying to come back and add on security features after the system is up and running is usually not as effective and more costly. So clearly designing and including security controls in those acquisition is key. What's also key is making sure that the acquisition officers and the team that's acquiring this have the cybersecurity expertise in order to assure that those security controls are being specified in the contracts and indeed are being adhered to by the contractors.
And one last question. What chief recommendations does GAO have to directly deter cyber attacks from other nations?
Well, one would be, of course, in terms, one is just for the agencies to be adequately secure to help prevent those attacks, but recognize that attacks are going to continue, and even in good security, they're likely to succeed because of their sophistication. In terms of working with other countries, one of the key things is to have an international strategy that addresses cybersecurity and come to an agreement with agencies of like mind to identify what those cyber norms are and to try to come up with procedures to protect against it. And when those countries or whomever attack us, is make sure that there's some sort of consequence as a result.
Thank you. I know I'm out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to probably go down a similar path here while we're on it. Of course, we spend billions of dollars developing and acquiring the best technologies that we can have for our military. Obviously, we want to maintain the advantage as much as possible. As I understand it, protecting these technologies, there are a lot of different agencies involved in administering the protection, from DOD to DHS and state, Treasury, a host of different administrations. Are any of these agencies more effective than others at protecting our technologies?
Yeah, Mr. Francis is our expert in this area. It's a good question, Congressman.
I thought that was on. There we go. I think the agency, there are at least 6 agencies involved. I don't know that any one is doing better than another, but in the export control area, where we actually have a formal process for end items, State and Commerce are doing, I think, a pretty good job in coordinating their licensing list and their licensing processes. It's the individual efforts by other agencies on anti-tamper and things like that, where the individual programs are not well coordinated. And we've made a simple recommendation: why don't you all just get together once a year and talk about what you're doing? That's not happening yet.
Why is that not happening, you think?
I don't think there's an incentive to do it. The agencies are all working.
This is a major deal. Obviously, our technologies are massively critical to the national security of our country and so forth. What would need to happen to get the proper incentive for those communications to occur?
Yeah, I think legislation by the Congress, where we've seen very effective interagency coordination mechanisms, there needs to be a statutory underpinning for those mechanisms so they transcend administrations, and having regular reporting requirements to the Congress. And when I've been having meetings with OMB and the agencies on the high-risk list for a number of years now, and I think when we had one on the export control area, it might have been the first time everybody got together to talk about these issues. And so I think it's very important to do this, because, as Paul mentioned, all these agencies have interrelated pieces, and they need to work together very effectively in order to make sure and keep things up to date, share information. Technology's rapidly advancing, as you point out, Congressman, and they need to be on top of this. But it'd be very effective, I think, to have some legislation.
Right.
We'd be happy to work with you on that.
Okay, yes, well let's please do. So you're saying the coordination is not there, is that correct?
Particularly in the non-export area. This would be, as Paul mentioned, the anti-tamper area, foreign military sales, and some other things. On export control, they're doing a little bit better job in that area. If they have a plan to reform it to go further, but they'll need legislation. So legislation's going to be needed in both areas, in my opinion.
Okay, if you would, please, let's work with our office. Let's see how we can get there. This is a critical issue that needs to be addressed. Speaking real quickly, and I know I don't have much time, but you mentioned NASA a little while ago, and of course they are, from what I understand, planning another big major launch sometime next year, latter part of 2018, I believe. Do you have concerns that NASA may not be ready for that type of big-scale launch?
Go ahead, Paul.
Yes, we do. We do have concerns. It has 3 elements. It's the launch system, the ground system, and the Orion space capsule. Right now, they're all on fairly high-risk schedules, not much margin left. They're not all that well coordinated. We think it's a very high risk of them not making that November 18 date.
All right, but they believe that they are right on schedule, meeting all the requirements. You would disagree with that, with their assessment?
I think they know they're on the edge.
On the edge of what?
Not making it.
So why are they saying that they're making it, that they're on schedule?
I think they've done internal analysis. They have not come out and said they can't make it yet, but every indication we have, it looks very unlikely that they are. So I think maybe it's a matter of time.
So in that case, you would disagree with their internal analysis?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate y'all being here. I yield back.
Yeah, Mr. Congressman, I would also like to thank you publicly for help in our bill to get the mandates reduced to GAO. It's helped us focus on our more important areas.
Well,
So
thank you, and I appreciate your letter saying so. It meant a great deal to me. Thank you.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Demings.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Mr. De Niro, and to all of our witnesses. Welcome. The GOA has found that sufficient progress has been made since 2005 to remove the high-risk designation from one area this year, establishing effective mechanisms for sharing and managing terrorism-related information to protect the homeland. In its 2017 high-risk report, GOA states, and I quote, "While the progress is commendable, it does not mean the government has eliminated all risks associated with sharing information or terrorism-related information." I understand that GOA has switched the designation of this area from risk to risk rather than high risk. Is that correct?
That's correct.
This is a concrete step, no doubt, in the right direction, and I hope we can continue to build on this progress. But I have to admit that I am worried that we may be losing some of the progress we have made in this area. Recently, the President issued an executive order pertaining to Homeland Security without seeking advice or conferring with Congress or any of the agencies whose mission it is to protect our nation. Orders meant to truly protect our country should be implemented and conducted in a thorough fashion and one that shares information in a productive manner. The American people deserve a government that directs its resources at well-planned and well-communicated efforts. Mr. De Niro, how important is information sharing to the security and well-being of our nation?
It's absolutely essential. I mean, that was one of the issues after the September 11th, 2001 attacks that was cited as a weakness. Congress passed an Intelligence Reform Act that there be established an information sharing environment, so there was sharing among all the agencies, and that's what's been implemented effectively. It's taken a number of years, a number of steps, and we've made a lot of specific recommendations, but they've made a lot of progress over the period of time and have demonstrated some results, particularly in geospatial information, sharing law enforcement databases, and also in maritime domain awareness, where they're in monitoring the seas. So we've seen some good progress. We'll be keeping a watchful eye to make sure that that progress continues.
What are some of the things you would suggest that we can do to sustain the progress or maximize it?
George?
Good morning. A couple areas where we think the continued focus is needed. It's important to ensure that, as we've said in the report, while we've taken it off the high-risk list, that does not mean that the risk does not remain. And so just ensuring that there's continued leadership, attention, and focus on this issue. Oftentimes, a number of the issues that face, whether it's information sharing or other issues, it's less about sort of technology challenges. It's more about sort of leadership commitment and staying focused on these issues. So I think that is one area where we can continue to pay attention in this area. And the other issue is making sure that they continue to develop and measure their progress in meeting goals for the program.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. DeSantis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dodaro, in terms of the DoD acquisition, I know there's been problems with the F-35, with the LCS. What steps is DoD taking to ensure that that doesn't happen in the future?
Yeah, I'll ask Mr. Francis, our expert in this area, to address that. Yeah, but I'm concerned.
Good morning. Yes, DoD is taking a number of steps. They have an initiative called Better Buying Power that involves doing better cost estimates, better monitoring. They're doing a report every year to check on how they're doing. So we think those are good things. They've improved the acquisition workforce, also good things. But we still see programs that are going forward without really measuring up to all the best practices they should at start. Like technology maturity, design, and having good cost and schedule estimates. And if those programs aren't right at the beginning, we're playing catch up the rest of the way. So DOD is not doing quite as well there, and I think there's a real important role for the Congress there to hold programs accountable and say no to programs that aren't measuring up.
Yeah, and the problem that we have is we don't do it at the beginning, like you said. Once you get to the F-35, there's so much money invested, it'd be stupid to say, now we're not going to do it and just abandon it. And so we got to get this right early on. And so did you read, there was an article in the Washington Post at the end of the year about a report that had been commissioned within the DOD. It identified a number of effectively dead weight costs that could be mitigated over a 5-year period. I think it was $125 billion. As I read the article in the report, none of that really affected the actual warfighter. DOD kind of deep sixed it. Have you been able to review that report, or are you familiar with the issues?
Go ahead, Jane.
Yeah, we're familiar with the issues. That was the Defense Business Board report, and their estimate over $125 billion was over a number of years. They cited a lot of same areas that we've cited where there are opportunities for savings. Some of the areas we were comfortable with their numbers, others we weren't. So no, they were headed in the right direction. I'm not sure there's that magnitude of savings available over that reasonable period of time, but there are savings to be had, and it's
do you know why the DOD leadership was so hostile to it after it had been put out?
Where's Kathy? Yeah, excuse me, she knows. This is Kathy Berry.
Revolving door, whatever works, let's just get it done.
They agreed with aspects of the study and, in fact, have internal reviews within DOD where they're looking for efficiencies. They had some disagreements on the amount of money that could be saved, but I would say overall they had some agreements with the specifics of the study, but weren't in full concurrence with the overall conclusions about how much money could be saved. Some of these efforts are still ongoing within DOD, some of these reviews, so ultimately it could result in some savings moving forward.
So we on the committee here, we are going to be reviewing kind of that report. I think that's going to happen in a couple of weeks. We're going to do the full committee hearing. And I think the thought is that obviously we have budget pressures. Defense is our #1 priority. Whatever dead weight is in there, I mean, to be able to get and root some of that out, that ultimately is going to free up more money for the warfighter, so it really benefits the people who are on the front lines. But my fear is if you don't start early in a new administration, a lot of this stuff just goes by the wayside. So we would definitely want to take your recommendations. We're going to do some fact-finding, but then try to facilitate even more reforms, because if we get this right, could eventually, I think, really be helpful to folks who are frontline warriors.
No, I agree with you completely. Actually, if you look at the high-risk list, probably a third of the areas on the high-risk list are DOD business management practices. I mean, we have the best military in the world, but when it comes to the business practices, there's a lot of room for improvement. We can help, but the fundamental...
What can we do, though, for the business systems? Are there recommendations?
Oh, we have lots of recommendations. Okay. We'll share with you all those recommendations, but the fundamental problem that everybody has is a lack of reliable information over there. DOD is the only major federal agency that's never been able to pass the test of an independent audit. And so, therefore, the room for people to quibble over the data is there's a large playing field there that there shouldn't be. Even in, how to gain the $10 billion Congress has mandated in headquarters reductions, what's the baseline? How do you measure that? So we have a lot of insight into those areas. We can help you a great deal.
No, absolutely. And it was supposed to be audited, I think, in the early 90s. It just never happened. And so it does make it more difficult. There's no doubt about it. Well, I appreciate you guys, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Cartwright, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And General Dodaro, welcome back.
Thank you.
It is a pleasure to have you back here. I first met you 4 years ago when you came in with the high-risk report at that time. And at that time, that was the first year you had climate change on one of the action items for the high-risk report. I just want to cite a statistic I saw today. Between 2005 and 2015, FEMA issued more than $67 billion in grants to assist communities and individuals devastated by extreme weather events. And Mr. Dodaro, you guys picked up on this. GAO has reported on climate change for a number of years now. The high-risk report cites climate change findings of the National Research Council and the U.S. Global Change Research Program. The report states, quote, according to the National Research Council, although the exact details cannot be predicted with certainty, there is clear scientific understanding that climate change poses serious risks to human society and many of the physical and ecological systems upon which society depends. GAO has done substantial work on the issue of climate change. The question is, what does the body of scientific literature suggest as to whether climate change is in fact occurring?
Yeah, well, we've deferred largely to the scientists at national academies and the global research group that you mentioned, which are made up of the agencies. Our angle on this, and the reason we're concerned, is the fiscal exposure of the federal government.
Me too. Fiscal exposure, that's what we're all here to talk about, the fiscal exposure of the federal government. And you wrote in your report, the federal government is not well organized to address the fiscal exposure caused by extreme weather events, right?
That's correct.
So how large are these exposures, and how high might the associated cost of inaction be?
Yeah, the exposures are in several different forms. We don't have an overall number, I'll say that up front. But number one is the federal government as a property owner. You know, I'm very concerned. DOD has raised this issue on the impact on its own operations, particularly on coastal areas, of protecting all those DOD assets that we built both domestically and internationally. Second is on the federal government as an insurer. The flood insurance program already owes over $20 billion to the Treasury Department. It is not actuarially sound, and it's subject to a lot of additional exposure. Crop insurance, the payments for the federal government for crop insurance have doubled over the last several years from what they were before, so there's likelihood there. The other issue is the federal government's never reformed the criteria it uses for declaring a natural disaster that it's going to step into. We're still using a per capita amount, you know, in individual states. We suggested that needed to be reformed. And the budgeting area is another area. We don't budget as a national government for major disasters. We budget for anything that's under $500 million. But when something big hits, we just go, you know, we take care of it, but we got to borrow.
So we're talking about the American taxpayers are property owners, they are insurers, and they bail out when there's a FEMA emergency. And this is why this is on the high-risk report, because we need to prepare for these crises. And your finding was that the federal government is not well organized to plan ahead for resilience and planning and things like that. So I have introduced legislation working with your office to create an oversight and governance structure and a process that requires agencies to implement government-wide resilience, preparedness, and risk management priorities, and elevating the role of OMB to ensure proper funding and implementation for these initiatives. The support for this has been bipartisan. My brother, Mr. Farenthold, is a co-sponsor of this. He's not here right now, but we also have a lot of taxpayers group that love this legislation. Taxpayers for Common Sense, National Taxpayers Union, Coalition to Reduce Spending, Taxpayers Protection Alliance, even the Reinsurance Association of America, people who are concerned about fiscal soundness and saving taxpayers money love this bill. It is the PREPARE Act. I will be reintroducing it again this Congress, and I want to thank you for all your work and your foresight in working on this problem.
Thank you very much.
I yield back,
Congressman Cartwright. Thank you.
Gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Mitchell, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. General Dodaro, you may have to rotate experts there, sir.
I need a chair on wheels.
What's that?
I said I need a chair on wheels. I'm just.
That's good. Yes, you do right here. If you remember Congress, you need wheels as well. Trust me on that. I'd like to talk a little bit about transportation, surface transportation. The GAO report found, somebody new. The GAO report found that several agencies failed to document key award decisions when making decisions regarding discretionary, I would say allegedly competitive grants. that resulted in poor decision-making. Specifically, GAO found that DOT failed to document key decisions and deviated from established procedures in awarding the Tiger grants, the Transportation Investment Generating Economic Recovery grants. What were your office's findings or recommendations regarding that matter?
Yeah, we were very concerned about the lack of documentation and the transparency on which these grants were awarded. Ms. Sigerud can't explain the details there. We've made some recommendations. They've taken some actions, but not enough. So I think congressional follow-up would be helpful. Kate?
GAO has looked at several different types of discretionary grants given by the Department of Transportation, including the Tiger grants that you mentioned, as well as more recently some transit grants related to emergency situations. In all of those cases, we found both a lack of transparency at the beginning about the criteria, and then explanation of how those criteria were applied throughout the entire process, including documentation of any decisions that were made outside or in not in agreement with those criteria. So we made sort of a wrap-up recommendation in December of this year regarding all of the discretionary grant programs at the department, and we will be monitoring how the department looks at both that upfront criteria setting as well as the decision-making and the documentation throughout.
Did your review look at how much money was spent outside the anticipated intent guidelines? Did you look at the amount of money that was, let's say, misallocated, for lack of a better term? Did you get an estimate of that?
I'd like to get that number to you for the record. We did look at grants and identified some that were elevated above others in apparent disagreement with the criteria that were originally established.
When you provide that, if you could provide not only the amount, but which grants and which locations they were for?
I'd like to get back with our team on that so we can determine the level of detail that we have.
If we could put that in the record, Mr. Chair, when we do receive that, I would appreciate it. One more quick question for you while I have time. One of the findings you note is that funding for transportation, highway transportation, has eroded in part because of inflationary impacts and the failure to raise the gas tax. Has the department made any recommendations regarding efficiency, regarding administrative cost cuts that can be made at DOT to, in fact, put more money in the highways?
No, we've not, you mean by the department, you mean the GAO?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I'll get back. I'll look at that, and we'll get back to you for the record. Nothing springs to mind offhand in that area. I think our main recommendations have been mostly geared toward making sure that the state's use of the highway money is producing good results.
Sure.
And that's been our primary area of concern. I don't think we've identified other areas that could be cut to shift money into that area.
Well, the question I would ask is how efficient are we being with the money, and how much money is being transmitted on to the states rather than spent on, I would say, bureaucratic overhead that in fact doesn't put highway miles, doesn't fix roads, which in Michigan and across this country are significant concerns.
Right. No, we'll go back. I'll go back and take a look and submit something for the record for that area. Offhand, nothing comes to mind.
I appreciate the review. Thank you very much. And now yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maloney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Palmer, for yielding. And it's always good to see you, Mr. Dodaro, and we all rely on the GAO in our daily decisions for your independent and professional judgment, so thank you. I'd like to direct my questions on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And as you know, the CFPB has returned over $12 billion to over 27 million Americans who have been victims of fraud and deception, and you rightfully applauded them for this achievement. Now, the high-risk report indicates that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has addressed all of GAO's previous recommendations. In fact, the report states that Congress should consider, and I quote, transferring other regulators' consumer protection authorities to the Bureau. I can assume that these statements are due to the Bureau's effectiveness and efficiency. Specifically, why are you recommending that other regulators in consumer protection transfer it over to the CFPB?
Yeah, let me ask Ms. Williams to respond to that.
So we issued a report last year that looked at the regulatory structure. And one of the things we observed in the consumer protection space is that there's fragmentation, that while the CFPB was created, there were certain responsibilities that went to CFPB, and there were others that were retained by the existing regulators. So this creates the potential for unevenness in terms of protecting consumers.
Yeah, but it's part of, if I might, Oris, it's part of an overall look that we had of the banking regulators, and we still think that there's a lot of overlap and duplication in the bank regulation area at large, and then within that framework, consumer protection issue was raised.
Yes. We also looked at the regulatory structure for depository institutions and also insurance.
Okay. I'd like to ask today about the recommendations in your report for the overall financial regulatory system. And the report indicates, and I quote, "Congress and financial regulators have made progress in improving the financial regulatory system." So that's really good news. And the report indicates that the Financial Stability Oversight Council, or FSOC, quote, "represents advancement in addressing systemic risks and threats to the U.S. financial system," end quote. And even that, and I quote, "its legal authorities may not be broad enough to ensure that it addresses all of the threats effectively." Now, can you comment on why you felt that it's not addressing everything effectively? It could be broader. Could you address that more?
Yeah, I'll ask Oris to give particulars, but I'm very concerned about this. You know, one of the issues when we put it on the high-risk list, one of the reasons in 2009 was there was not a systemic risk focus by any of the regulatory areas, and this was one of the major failures that led to the global financial crisis and the crisis we had in our country. And so instead of designating a regulator, they gave the responsibility to FSOC to do. And we've looked at their work, tried to encourage them to be more transparent and thorough, and also have a better research group, not duplicate what the individual regulators were doing. And in some of the recommendations we had, if I recall correctly, they believed they didn't have the legal authority to do it, so we recommended that Congress clarify it. Oris can provide the specifics.
Okay, could you elaborate on that?
Yes. So the council consists of independent regulators. So if a problem is identified by the council, they aren't able to bind any of the regulators to take action to address any particular risk that may emerge in the system. And that's what the matter that we had spoke to was, perhaps if FSOC is going to be the systemic risk entity, then it should have responsibilities and authorities commensurate with the helping to identify and address systemic risk issues.
Well, that's interesting, because some of my colleagues are working to abolish the CFPB, which seems to be incredibly successful in helping consumers, and I would say the financial system, because the overall financial system thrives when consumers are also successful, and that the FSOC does not have implementation powers as strong as they should. I want to thank you for your very helpful insight into this, and basically your statement that abolishing these new safeguards for the financial system would be a mistake and hurt the overall economy. So my time has expired, so I want to thank you for your hard work. I love GAO. I probably ask for too many reports from all of you, but they're always insightful and very helpful, and I'm very appreciative. It's helped advance our work in a bipartisan way. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dodaro, thank you so much for your work, and as I look out into the audience with a lot of your fellow colleagues, a real thank you to all of you as well. I know this is not your first rodeo, and we do appreciate your work. And it makes a difference. I think I need to stress that the recommendations that many times, a lot of times we can do these recommendations and think that no one is listening and no one is hearing, but I can tell you that not only do we listen normally, whether it's Census or even Mr. Dodaro, I think strategic oil reserves was one of the things that you mentioned that we needed to address. So it got used as a pay-for at least 3 or 4 times after your hearing. I think we only had, $25 billion. I think we used it 4 times, $100 billion worth. As we become more accustomed to some of the recommendations that you make, what I'd like to do is for us to look just for our accountability and maybe for GAO's benefit is the number of recommendations that actually get implemented. And not just by agency, but overall, those cost-saving recommendations. I know that you're doing that as they come off the high-risk list, but the more specific where you can actually give the feedback to the individual sector that is working. So whether it's DOD or the IRS or anything else, if we could do that. So let me go very specifically to 2, if your DOD person would come back up real quick on foreign military sales.
Yes.
And something that I need to get more clarification on, primarily because I've got somebody coming in to ask me about something today, as it would happen. They're not in my district, and so I feel like maybe I can speak out a little bit more clearly. But with regards to foreign military sales and what I would say sole source procurement, where there is one person that ultimately gets the contract and where they get disqualified because of not having dealt with the bureaucracy of the United States before. Is that a common practice? And if that is a common practice, does that not present a barrier to entry for anyone else wanting to compete for the same type of business? Because the reason supposedly was that they don't normally deal with the bureaucracy of the federal government, even though they are qualified to sell to the government, but because they haven't done it, they got thrown out. Is that common?
I don't know how common it is, but it happens.
Have you seen it before?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes.
if you've seen it before and we have a barrier to entry because you haven't done business with the federal government, you can't do business with the federal government in the future, does that not have a chilling effect on competition?
Yes, and it keeps non-traditional firms from entering into the DoD market, and we're not able to take advantage of some of the commercial innovation, and we're taking a look at that right now.
All right, well, you take the message back that there's one member from North Carolina that is not going to give up on this particular issue, and that he has the support of 2 very senior senators in the upper chamber that would, not necessarily from my state, that are looking at this very exact thing. And so if you would take to them that if they're going to have a chilling effect on competition, we're going to look a lot closer at the procurement aspects as it relates. Would you do that for me?
We will do that.
All right, great. Mr. Darrow, in the 49 seconds I have remaining, let's look at tax gap and and truly at where we are in terms of not collecting taxes. I understand the newest one is $406 billion is the tax gap. Eventually that becomes real money, doesn't it?
In a hurry.
Yeah, in a hurry. So when we look at EITC and the Earned Income Tax Credit, it shows that improper payments average around 25 to 26%. Is that correct?
I believe that's right.
And so is that a historical trend, which typically doesn't change much year to year?
Yeah, as I recall, it's been pretty much in that neighborhood over time. I'll go back, I'll give the exact numbers for the record. There was a slight drop this past year, but there's no big changes that I've seen. There's some structural issues with that area.
Okay, so if there are structural issues, at what point do we get serious? Because even just on the improper payments there, according to my notes, it's between 13 and $15 billion.
Right. It's the third largest improper payment behind Medicare and Medicaid.
So how do we fix it?
There are a couple things that have to be looked at. One is the statutory basis for the earned income tax credit. It's a very complicated situation, and I
So
think
are you suggesting that members of Congress passed something that was very complicated?
in this particular case, I might say that it could be simplified.
Okay.
And it
You need to run for office. That was very political, yeah.
I'm happy with my current job.
As you should be. I've run out of time, so I will give you some for the record. I want to be sensitive to the chair, and if we would, I'll yield back, but I'll follow up and give your tax experts some. We need some as we look at the Affordable Care Act, the repeal, replacement. We're about to make some more complicated decisions that I don't want to make sure. I want to make sure we don't make the same mistake. I'll yield back.
Okay.
Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Holmes Norton, for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. I have a question about the effect of the elimination of regulations that is going full bore here now. So let's start with one. Mr. Dodaro, the management of federal oil and gas resources by our country has been put on the high-risk list since 2011. According to your report, some progress has been made on implementing the GAO's recommendations in this area, and I note that resources from oil and gas amount to $49 billion at least I'm quoting now from fiscal years 2011 through 2015, and therefore one of the government's largest sources of non-tax revenue. Now, in past GAO work has found that the American people, or that the country, may not be getting a fair return from oil and gas produced from federal leases. The Bureau of Land Management revises its GAO recommended that the Bureau of Land Management revise its regulations to charge higher royalty rates to companies producing oil and gas on public lands. Now, I understand that this recommendation was implemented as part of BLM's final rule on methane and waste reduction. Now, I like your view on the effect you envision, given what you know about your recommendations to put it into effect in the first place. What would be the likely effect if this rule were finally overturned?
Yeah, I'd like to ask Mr. Gaffigan to address that. He's our expert in that area.
Thank you for your question. Yeah, our recommendation was in the revenue collection area, basically that BLM should provide itself some flexibility to change the rates. They hadn't been looked at in a long time, and BLM went through a long process to do that and was, as you indicated, able to do a proposed rule which allows for this flexibility. What happens in the future is very dependent on where the resource is, what's at stake. They obviously want to provide a competitive rate. They want to price themselves out of the market by having a rate that's too high. But at least they've set the stage for providing the flexibility to collect revenues. And as you mentioned,
They had done that in the rule.
they've done that in a rule in November of 2016. Was the rule.
So the notion that one of these rules may actually deprive us of revenues is almost laughable if it weren't so sad. The GAO has looked intensively at this area. It is also recommended that BLM update other regulations, including I understand this is called onshore order number 3, to help BLM accurately determine how much is due in royalties, and that this was implemented. With onshore order number 3, if we see its elimination, how would you characterize the potential effect?
I think that there's a lot of things happening in that area of revenue collection. We still have it in sort of a partially met status in terms of where BLM is in this, because I think we need to see how it plays out. One of the issues.
What do you mean by partially?
The criteria for coming off the high risk. We think they have made some progress, but they haven't fully met it, and we have it at the partially met category because we think we need to see it implemented. And I think there's still some remains to be seen work that needs to be done in this.
How much of it has been implemented?
I'm sorry.
You say it's been partially implemented.
Right. I think
So we're almost there? We're halfway there?
I think they set the stage for them to be able to do some of these things.
So you must have some view then on what would happen if that halfway or that.
Well, we're going to continue to monitor it and continue to monitor this area as we have for a number of years to see. We think there has been some progress made, but there's more work that needs to be done.
If in some of these areas, when we're monitoring them all the time, if we see progress has regressed, we will state that. We will let the Congress know. In fact, in this oil and gas area, we're saying for their reorganization area on the high risk, they've regressed. They haven't fixed in their safety and environmental management. They're still using pre-Deepwater Horizon investigation rules. They haven't fixed that. There's problems in planning and documenting and have quality assurance over their investigations. In the environment area, they're still operating on a 30-year-old agreement with EPA. They haven't changed that yet. And their enforcement mechanisms, they haven't been very clear on that area as well. And they've changed in some of the environment area. They're reversed their reorganizational structure plans that they had in place. So that's an area where we're saying this year, for that aspect of it, they've moved backwards, not forward. And we'll keep an eye on these other areas as well.
Thank you very much.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dodaro, I see on here on the list of 34 at-risk programs is improving federal oversight of food safety. I missed your opening comments, but if you'd like to say something about that, I'd love to hear.
Yeah. We've had that on a list for a number of years. It's a very fragmented system that we have. There's 30 different laws, about 16 different federal agencies that are involved in food safety. We've recommended that there be, comprehensive reform, that they have a food safety government-wide plan that spells out what needs to be done. There's metrics on how to be doing it. They used to have the executive branch used to have a food safety working group. That's fallen by the wayside. We're saying Congress, we believe, should, at a minimum, reestablish that group, ask for a government-wide plan with measures and milestones, particularly as we're importing more food as well. I mean, the number of imported food now has almost doubled in the past several years. And so I think it's very important that they address this issue.
What are the potential contributors to the increase in reported multi-state outbreaks of foodborne illness?
Yeah, Mark. Mr. Gaffigan's our expert in that area, too.
Great.
I don't quite have the range he has, but there's a couple things going on. We have more and more of our food that's imported across the world. We have more and more of our folks eating raw and unprocessed foods. And we also have more vulnerable populations. As people age, they're more vulnerable to these things. So those are 3 factors that can contribute to more of the multi-state outbreaks.
How about the centralization of food processing and preparation and production?
That hasn't been cited as a contributor one way or the other. I think our main concern is having 30 different agencies involved in this, and we're just talking about the federal agencies. There's a lot of efforts at the state and local level that are involved in in our food safety system. And there's really a need, I think, for a national strategy to get these stakeholders together. And like any cross-cutting issue, it starts with leadership, who's in charge, defining roles and responsibilities. And we have a report that's just come out that reiterates some of this. We gathered some experts from with the assistance of the national academies, brought folks in, former FIS folks, former FDA folks, folks from the grocery industry and throughout. And it's really a phenomenal group of experts, and that was a theme of theirs. You know, a lot of folks doing a lot of good work, but we need somebody to kind of take charge and assign these roles and responsibilities.
Well, from the folks that I talk to, they say that, you know, our food supply system is actually, the more centralized it is, the more brittle it becomes and at risk, because if you have an issue in one slaughterhouse or in one field, it could show up in 12 different states very quickly. And so, you know, we've seen a lot of recalls that are nationwide instead of the local grocery store or something. So here's based on what both of you have said, here are a couple things that I have noticed that I want to comment on. I know a lot of small farmers. I've noticed that they're decreasing in number. The number of dairies is decreasing. The number of abattoirs, slaughterhouses is decreasing, and it's becoming more centralized. And this actually puts us, it's more efficient, but it's also a riskier system in terms of the magnitude of an outbreak if it happens. Here's the ironic thing. What's pushing this trend is the fact we have 16 different administrative facilities for enforcing the laws, and the small guys, the small producers, are being forced out by the regulations that are intended to keep us safer. So the regulations are leading to a greater centralization. Just the overhead of compliance, for instance, for a local slaughterhouse, puts, you know, they go out of business and then it consolidates. So I would just say I'd like to keep that in mind as we promulgate more and more regulations that the little guys aren't going to be able to keep up with. So you can't buy food from your local processor or local farmer. You got to buy it from another state. So keep that in mind. Another thing that disappointed me a couple years ago, and I think this somewhat puts the consumer more at risk, is here in Congress, we got rid of country of origin labeling for beef and pork a couple years ago in the omnibus bill. And we were told we had to do this for trade reasons. But as you pointed out, we've doubled our consumption of food overseas, and I think everybody can agree there's not a uniform food safety law across the globe. And I think the best thing you can do is say, okay, buyer beware. This is the country that it's coming from. So I think for food safety, let's just keep in mind that more regulations doesn't mean always safer food, because it gets more it leads to more centralized production, and I think labels are always a good thing. So with that, I'll yield back to Chairman.
Yeah, well, just for the record, we're not calling for more regulation.
Okay, great.
Okay,
Thank you.
We're calling for a streamlined, simplified, more cohesive system, which could lead to a streamlining of the regulations.
And I think that would be great for smaller producers and actually make our food supply system less brittle if they could deal with one agency instead of 16.
Yeah, and we'll submit our most recent report, which I think was just issued this past week, for the record.
Great. Thank you both. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Desaulniers, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your leadership skills today. So I wanted to talk a little bit about tax law enforcement and identity theft, whoever is going to move up to the chair for that.
Okay.
While you're doing your well-choreographed, I just want to...
Right. I can handle some of these.
I'm aware.
Okay.
I'm aware. Just the fact that you admitted that you didn't want to run for office is a good indication of your intellectual capacity. And to all of you, seriously, thank you for the work you do. This is really incredibly important work. It may seem out of the limelight in our political environment, but I wish we did more of it. And as others have said on both sides of the aisle, this is really the meat and potatoes of what we should do in Congress in a bipartisan way. So in your 2015 high-risk report, you included tax law law enforcement and identity theft for the IRS. As much as $14.5 billion you identified in tax fraud was attempted in 2015. 85% of that we were able to recover. So the question is just the pressures between us not investing in the Internal Revenue Service, and then whatever impact the hiring freeze would have on attracting the best quality people, because I assume that the bad guys are constantly out there trying to push the envelope, and obviously it's in everyone's best interest to make sure that people are protected, but also that people who pay their taxes on time, both their federal and state and local taxes, realize the integrity of the process. So if you could comment on the challenges to making sure that the personnel and the infrastructure are, we're investing properly in it in regards to both the decrease in our support of the IRS overall and the potential impact from the hiring freeze.
Right. In the identity theft area, and then I'll turn it over to Chris for specifics, they've actually allocated more resources to that area, which is one of the reasons they've made some progress. I was also pleased to see the Congress implement our recommendation that you accelerate the W-2 information reporting from employers from March or April to January. This will enable IRS to better match the information, but they'll need to have the systems in place to be able to do that, to effectively take advantage of that congressional flexibility that's been given to them. The skill issues, Mr. Mim is focused on that. I'll turn it over to him.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. In addition to the additional resources IRS has put on it under its own initiative, Congress also provided additional resources in this particular area, as well as the service side last year, to make sure that they could augment their capacity to detect and respond to identity theft issues. The challenge that they face is precisely the one that you mentioned, is that we have an adversary that's adaptive, and it's so is the moment you put in one set of controls or one set of ways detection technologies, they are able to figure that out and are working very aggressively to get around that. So the big ongoing challenge that the IRS faces is making sure that they have authentication procedures in place, that they can really know that when you or I are saying we're you or I, we are indeed ourselves and not somebody in a foreign country.
So, in the issue of attracting and retaining young people who can make a good deal of money in the private sector doing this kind of work, are we able to keep up with that challenge to attract and retain the best people?
This is an issue across government,
right.
Not just IRS. And we put strategic human capital management on the high-risk list in 2001 because we were concerned that the government is behind in that area. It's something that I'm concerned about government-wide. I'm very concerned about the federal workforce in terms of skill gaps, impending retirements, and the complexity has increased in terms of some of the issues the federal government has to deal with. Cyber is a classic example of this, but acquisition is another area. We're acquiring much more sophisticated weapons technology, satellite systems, space-based systems, et cetera. So this is an area that I would really underscore that needs careful attention. I know I'm more worried about it. I'm fortunate that I'm able to attract and retain talented people in GAO. We're not in the executive branch system. We have our own personnel authorities, which I attribute it largely to the reason we're able to operate effectively. But you're right to be worried about this, not only at the IRS, but across the government.
And in regards to the hiring freeze, how does that concern you? I was reading one of your reports from the 80s talking about the implications of a hard hiring freeze, but particularly when it comes to revenue collection.
Yes, a hiring freeze is not an effective way to manage the workforce. Our past work has shown that not to be true. Now, in this case, they're doing it temporarily. They're going to come up with a plan. I'm anxious to see what the plan would be that they come up with in order to do this. They've made some exceptions in some areas, which is important to do as well. But you really need a good workforce plan. And you also need to make decisions about what you want the government to do. If you still have all the requirements for government to do things, but you have less people to do it, you're going to have problems. There will be breakdowns. There will be unsatisfied objectives. So if you reduce some of the functions of government, then the people that go along with those functions, you can reduce it that way. So either through budgetary controls or through strategic workforce planning would be the most optimal way to deal with making sure you have not only the size workforce you want, but the one with the right skills.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes gentleman from California, Mr. Issa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Just to put it in perspective, because I think the gentleman from California did tee it up pretty well, but today, the federal government, in all of its programs, including Medicare, Social Security, and so on, consumes a greater portion of our gross domestic product than ever before. Isn't that accurate?
That's correct.
So government has grown in the size and amount of money that it takes in. So in a nutshell, is it fair to say that if we're getting more money as a percentage of the total wealth of the country, we have no one to blame if we don't have enough money for vital programs than ourselves?
That's true.
But I'm going to go back to something you said. I'm not trying to hold you accountable, but I know a little bit about what you try to do. How many slots do you have today, and how many of them have you been able to fill because of limited resources?
We don't have a set number of slots.
But you used to have a lot more full-time equivalent.
Oh, yes. Yes, we did. Most recently, we had about 3,250 before the sequester. We've been under 3,000 people most recently.
So the IRS isn't the only group that's being told to do more with less and leverage technology, are they?
That's correct. And we think, just for the record on the IRS, that they could do more with the resources they have. We don't think they've measured good return on investment about different enforcement strategies and allocated the resources.
And isn't it true, if you know, that the IRS has done very little to deal with the kind of fraud that has become rampant, where people, through identity theft, basically file your tax return quickly and get a return from the government? That's a growing industry, isn't it?
It's a growing industry, but they have taken some measures. We give them credit for it in this report, and also the Congress for giving them additional legislation to get the W-2 information from employers earlier, which will help them match. Previously, people could file their returns and they didn't have the W-2s.
Right. In the old days, a quick filer comes in early January and just defrauds and gets away with it. It's a little harder now.
Yeah.
I want to go to one of the areas that you note. It's a new area. You have a fairly broad group of problems for Native Americans.
Yes.
And this is new. Education is failing we, the federal government, are failing in our responsibility to bring education to the tribal areas, correct?
That's correct. And
Indian
particularly
health,
the condition of the schools.
right. Indian health care service is not meeting its responsibilities. Is that true?
That's correct.
And when Native American tribes try to do energy programs, energy development programs, you noted that they're finding extreme burdens in trying to do their own programs on Native American land.
Yes.
So, first time, but it looks like there's an attack on Native Americans on three fronts: their education, their opportunity of energy and employment, and, of course, their health. How are we going to fix this?
I think you need better leadership over at the Bureau of Indian Affairs and Indian Health Services. It has to be a higher priority. When I meet with the new Secretary of Interior, once there is one, I'm going to raise this issue to them. This is a serious problem. Staffing isn't up to where it needs to be at a lot of these locations. There are no health care standards and metrics that they're supposed to have. They're still allocating the money for contract care, for health care, using a formula they used in the 1930s. Lack of attention would be the underlying theme, Congressman Issa, that I would think.
So
we put on the list to elevate attention to it. It needs a leadership commitment.
And that leadership failure is, in fact, at the Department of Interior. They've gotten to where you now see three separate parts of our dealing with our obligation for these tribal lands in a way in which it's got to be almost job one of the Secretary of Interior to find himself some key lieutenants and put them to work.
Yeah, exactly. And there's Department of Health and Human Services has a role here, too.
Well, they do have a secretary now, so that's
I plan to meet with Secretary Price.
Well, I plan to meet with them on this issue, too, because California, as you know, has a fairly extensive amount of Native American assets. You've been doing this for a long time, and I did note that you're doing more with less. But in the remaining seconds, just tell me, if you could have one thing from this committee, one thing to make your job easier and more successful, what would it be? We'll leave money aside.
Attention and more hearings on the high-risk areas.
Well, I look forward to that. I might add one that I hoped you would say, but I didn't prep you, and that is the type of interference that you've had from previous executive branch where they found you a nuisance, they argued over what your statutory authority was, and denied you access. Would that also be something you'd put high on the list?
Oh, definitely. I'll be on your doorstep right away if there's a problem.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I asked that question for a reason. I know Will's going to be next, but the last administration, I think, failed, and it is our obligation to hold this administration to a much higher standard, to cooperate with the GAO, because without them, our oversight is not meaningful. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hurd, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Palmer, for saving the best for last.
Well, I'm actually last.
Oh, okay. There you go.
But I accept that compliment.
Mr. Dodaro, great to see you. When I was elected to Congress 3 Novembers ago, I never would have expected that GAO would be my new favorite department. And what you and your team do is integral to our role as oversight and to helping make sure that our federal government is lean, mean, and responsive to the citizens that they serve. And so thank you to you and your team for all that work. And I don't start any project off without saying, hey, what does GAO say about that, and not try to recreate the wheel. What I'd like to talk to you about is the VA. And your recent report indicates there are significant gaps between the VA's stated plans and its actual progress. You flag improving access to timely medical appointments as requiring immediate action. This is after the VA has already spent $127 million over 9 years to modernize outpatient scheduling. What's the current status of the VA's scheduling system? What actual progress has there been in improving the scheduling of veterans' medical appointments? And why is this such a problem?
Yeah, this current scheduling system they have is 30 years old. It's been a problem because it hasn't been properly managed. Their IT structures, we just issued a report. Dave Ponder, who you're very familiar with.
He's fantastic. I see him over
Dave's
there.
here, and he can explain their IT problems in more detail. I'm very concerned about this area. I raised it to the high-risk list last update because I knew it wouldn't be fixed right away, but I'm disappointed in the lack of progress.
So, and to both of you, gentlemen, Mr. Pound, it's always good to see you, and thanks for your work that you and your team are doing on the scorecards that we provide on the agencies. I had a veteran come up to me recently, had heart problems, high blood pressure, and he lived in Texas. He was in Florida visiting his kids. He goes into the Florida VA because he was having real problems, didn't have his medicine. It took 9 hours to get him to get entered into the system. It's 2017, for God's sake. This is, you should be able to pull him up. Is the enterprise so big that it requires years to implement a scheduling system in your expert opinion?
No, absolutely not. I mean, they should go to a commercial solution. There are commercial solutions. Obviously, scheduling medical appointments is not unique to the Veterans Affairs Department. Dave will tell you that as well. I'm also concerned that they're not measuring wait times for patients. They don't start measuring wait times until a veteran can call for an appointment, then they have to check eligibility, then eventually a scheduler will get back to the person, and then they'll ask them when they're first available to have an appointment. And then they'll say, well, I'd like to come in on the 17th, let's say, for example. And they say, we don't have anything on the 17th. So they'll start only from that time counting wait time when it could have been many days before this even transpires. But Dave can talk about the IT. They spend over $4 billion a year, and we're getting very limited return on that investment.
I'm glad this table is attached to the floor because I'd flip it over on the next topic, and that's DOD and VA electronic healthcare interoperability.
I'll come and help you.
How long is it going to take us to achieve true interoperability?
You know, we flagged this issue probably 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, you have the two most bureaucratic government entities trying to work together in this area. They haven't done it. They still haven't provided us a good rationale for why they decided not to have an integrated system, and they've gone off on their own way. DOD has a system that's, they bought now a commercial system. Maybe VA ought to consider, you know, that as an option as well. You know, I don't want to limit competition and procurement. I'm not saying it, but studies that were done show that 90+% of the requirements are the same for the two systems.
Mr. Powell, you have the remaining time I have or do not have.
Well, I think the key here with both scheduling and electronic health record, they go hand in hand. So you could modify the current systems, or you can go commercial. With commercial electronic health records, there's typically scheduling modules. VA is piloting those initiatives right now. They're leaning towards the commercial decision. Now that the Secretary is in place, they're waiting for the decision to be made. The decision should be go commercial. That'll go a long ways towards interoperability with DOD.
Buy, not build.
Correct.
Excellent. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. And these will be rapid fire, if I may. I mean, if you need to go into an extended explanation, then do so. On the enforcement of tax laws, the information that I have, you show $385 billion tax gap in 2006. Do you know what it was in 2016?
It's the equivalent number, the net tax gap's about $406 billion.
Okay. And how about 2015?
Well, they only measure it every once in a while.
Every once in a while?
Yeah, so they don't measure it every year. That's the latest estimate is a net tax gap of over $400 billion.
I saw a number yesterday. Well, the net. Now I'm glad you clarified because the total tax gap was like 456.
That's correct. And then they expect to collect so much.
Okay. Right.
That's I gave you the number that compared to the 385.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate the clarification. On the improper payments, that's a big deal with me. I think we've had this conversation before. The 36. The improper payments doesn't account for all the proper payments on Medicaid. You made that. You said there's $36 billion, and then approximately another $60 billion on Medicare.
Right.
On the Medicaid, you said it didn't account for all of it. So
yeah,
do you have
managed care.
A ballpark?
No, I don't. Unfortunately, I don't.
How about on Medicare? Do you think that represents all the improper payments there?
That estimate's pretty good on Medicare, and now that they're measuring all parts of Medicare, you know.
So we're right at $100 million a year, and this has been going up, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct. It's been going up.
So it hasn't improved. I was informed a few days ago that there may be some indication that not all federal agencies are reporting improper payments.
That's correct. I'm very concerned about that. I pointed that out. There were at least a dozen programs that did not report this past year. One was the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, or the old food stamp program. The Temporary Assistance for Needy Families has never reported. They don't believe that they can do it. I've encouraged Congress to pass legislation that require them to make that effort, and a number of agencies just haven't done it. So the estimates, government-wide estimate of $144 billion for 16 is not a complete estimate. And we've flagged this for a number of years on our government-wide audit, is that the federal government doesn't have reasonable assurance that it knows the full extent of improper payments and can address those issues. 90% of the improper payments, or the last figure, are overpayments. There are some that are underpayments. That's a problem too, because somebody that should be getting a benefit isn't, but most of it are overpayments.
Well, here's the thing that concerns me. I'm also on the Budget Committee, and I've made this point that there are days I feel like my head will explode. We're expending money improperly, and and not properly funding other programs where we're now obviously deficit spending. So we're literally borrowing money and paying interest on it as a result of improper payments and the failure to fully collect all the taxes.
That's
I
exactly
mean, you
right.
add these two together, and again, to your point that we don't know that this is all that's being expended improperly, we're talking almost $600 billion, and in our 10-year window, that's $6 trillion, and it's going up.
Right.
And we're having, and we're laying that on future generations plus interest.
Right.
That's
right.
maddening.
Yes, yes, it is. I testified before the Senate Finance Committee on this very issue. I'd like to submit my statement for the record, both on the tax gap and improper payments. I mean, it won't solve our long-term and sustainable fiscal path, but it will make a huge contribution if we could get these two areas under control.
I thank you for that, and with that objection. I want to go back to something Ms. Holmes Norton brought up about the revenues from the Bureau of Land Management, and how much is reported that we collected in royalties and revenues?
Yeah, I'll have to, here, I have an answer quick
Yeah.
for you. We're
Okay.
rapid fire.
Yeah, we're trying to-
For oil and gas, it's about
Well, I have the gavel, so we'll be a little flexible.
it's about $10 billion a year for oil and gas.
Okay. There's a number of reports that indicate that the revenues over a 15-year period as a result of repealing the ban on exporting crude oil should increase. But one of the things that I found out, and I want to clarify this, make sure I heard it right, the last that I heard, we hadn't increased the royalty rate since the 1920s. Is that correct, or did that change?
There have been changes since the 1920s. The major law, one of the major laws is from the 1920s, but there hasn't been a huge change in recent years in the royalty rates, both onshore and offshore, but there has been some tweaking.
What is the royalty rate?
It ranges from about 12 to 18%, depending if it's onshore or offshore.
What's the royalty rate that private sector, private landowners get?
That can range, and we could give you some estimates of that. Obviously, we are only familiar with the federal rules.
On the high end, though, I think it's less than,
Yeah, and
it's
some of
more
this-
than, it's more than what the federal government gets. I
Yeah,
believe.
there's a study that compared federal government to state governments and what they receive as well as the private sector. We can get you a summary of that study.
I'd appreciate that. Continuing on our rapid fire deal on the improper payments, and I think you may have addressed this, but on the Social Security disability programs, I know we're expending money improperly there as a result of the failure to do the 3-year reviews. So if we could, I'd like to, if you've got a number on that, you can submit that to us later. I want to ask you something about federal real property, and has there been any estimate for how much could be sold and how much revenue would be generated from that?
There's not an estimate I'm aware of. I'll double check, and if so, I'll submit it.
Well, if you do that, could you also include an estimated savings on maintenance and upkeep?
Okay.
Because that is an annual expenditure that we want to address. I want to ask you another one, and this has to do with, you've made progress in getting these agencies to meet the criteria, and you show that that the benefits, approximately $240 billion, are over that 10-year period, about $24 billion a year. Do you have any idea if what that financial benefit would be to the federal government if all of the agencies met the criteria?
No, I don't have an estimate on that, but most of that money comes from DOD weapon systems that we've been able to curtail. A lot of it's Medicare, Medicaid, and the tax revenue side. So it's all big areas. If we can continue to I think those areas have huge potential. I know it's tens of billions. I mean, I just don't have a complete estimate.
All right. And Mr. Desaulniers, no, it was Mr. Cartwright, I apologize, no mistaken identity here, brought up the issue of climate change. Has the GAO looked into the federal government and the nation's exposure to an EMP event, electromagnetic pulse event?
We have, and I'll submit those reports for the record.
Without objection. And then the last thing, and this is a clarification, when someone was asking about the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and indicated that that they have have guarantees backing them up that are $200 billion, maybe a little bit more. There was an article in the Washington Post last October that indicated that guarantee was only about $83 billion. Could someone just check into that and clarify that?
Yeah, we'll clarify for the record, but I'm pretty confident on our number.
Yeah. Well, I just saw that, and I'm not questioning your number. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page on that.
Okay, we'll check what the Post was talking about, and we'll check our number, and then I'll give it for the record.
Okay. You have questions? All right. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. GAO removed the personal security clearance as a high-risk area a few years back, 5 years ago now. Since then, the security clearance system has seen a lot of changes, reform initiatives. You guys are not listing it as high risk now, but your report discusses ongoing reviews of the overall reform effort. What do you think is going right in the reform effort, and what concerns does GAO have as you move forward?
Yeah, well, I think they're implementing a number of the recommendations that they had from the reviews that were done after the Washington Navy Yard incidents and the incidents with the OPM breach. But I'm still concerned about several areas. One, you have this new entity, the National Background Investigation Service, that's just been stood up in October. There's also a move to transfer the IT systems to DOD to manage those systems. The National Defense Authorization Act is requiring DOD to consider taking over the background investigations again for DOD. So there's a lot of moving parts right now, and I'm also concerned about whether or not adequate changes have been made to properly protect the security of these very important systems. So we're looking at all those areas right now, and the work we're going to do should be finished by this fall. And if I'm concerned about it at that point, I'll add it to the high-risk list out of cycle. I've done that before if circumstances warranted.
Okay, the National Background Investigations Bureau was supposed to be responsible for conducting security clearance investigations. There's a feeling that things are moving a little bit slowly there. Do you have any recommendations for Congress?
Yeah, Kathy Berg's our expert in that area.
Oh,
Kathy.
good. Well, we get somebody different. Ask the right question.
Well, there's currently a significant backlog at MBIB. They came into existence, became operational in October of 2016. There's already a 569,000 backlog of personnel security clearance investigations that need to be conducted. So I think one of the first things they need to do is develop a plan for how they're going to work through that backlog. They are hiring an additional couple hundred of people. They also doubled their number of contractors from 2 to 4. But I think actually having a concrete plan on how they're going to work through that is going to be important. I also think it's important for them to work with the DNI, the Security Executive Agent for security clearances, to develop government-wide quality metrics for personnel security clearances. So they're not just focused on the backlog, but they're also focused on the quality of investigations. I think those are probably the two most important things they should do. And now I'll throw a third in as well, which is oversight over their contractors, since contractors conduct the bulk of background investigations for both initial and reevaluation. So oversight is important, and that's something we're also currently looking at.
At the current path, are they going to work their way through the backlog?
They have no specific plan or time frame on when they'll work through it. They've just said it's going to take time.
Do we know, is the backlog getting greater or lesser?
It's gotten greater over recent years,
So
in
right-
part due to the OPM data breach, in part due to new investigative standards.
Okay. According to the most recent reporting by the Performance Accountability Council, the time it takes to conduct an investigation has been the highest it's been in years. Do you think that's a problem?
Well, timeliness was the reason we put it on the high-risk list in the first place. So, and that was after 9/11 occurred, so more things became classified and secret sensitive and things, so more people needed background investigations. So timeliness is something we'll look at, but quality and quality standards is also important. So we'll be looking at both of those issues.
Both of them. Can you give me a time frame right now?
Yeah, we'll issue our reports in the fall, right?
I mean, not
Right.
your time frame, but their time frame. What is the standard wait?
Yeah.
It varies within the intelligence community and outside of, sometimes it could be over 200 days. It just varies depending on the agency.
Okay, like what agency would be 200 days?
I'll have to get that information for you, and we could submit it for the record.
Okay, thanks. I'll yield the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields. I would like to thank our witness, Mr. Dodaro. I always enjoy our time together. And all the folks from GAO who accompanied him for taking time to appear before us today. Several members asked for additional information for the record, so we would appreciate your provision of the information requested. Ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit questions for the record. Without objection, so ordered. If there are no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.